Hey, Village people and family and friends, it is so good to see you. Actually, I wish I could see you, and you're probably tired of seeing me here with this background. I've got this sign in our dining room that I took down off of the wall just a second ago, and it says the word gather on it. And every time I walk by this sign and I look at it and I see the word gather, it makes me wonder, when are we ever going to gather together again as the village? Are we ever going to be back together? And I know a lot of you are asking that question. I'm getting asked that question a lot. And so if you're asking that question, I want you to know that you're not alone. And I want you to know that our lead team is continuing to work diligently to try to figure this out. We're working with a team of medical professionals from our church. We're, of course, paying attention to the conversation on the national and local level with the CDC and other experts. And we're in conversation with Williamson County Schools about how they're trying to navigate when and if they're going to allow groups back into their buildings again. And so I want to share with you a few of the principles that are kind of guiding our decision making and our thinking on this as we move forward. The first is simply this. We've never closed. Our church has never closed. We've been talking about this recently, that often we think of church as the 1 hour that we gather per week, but the reality is there are 168 hours of the week that we're called to be the church together. So we're the church gathered for 1 hour, we're the church scattered for 167 other hours. And even in those 167 hours, we're called to reach and serve our neighbors with the love of Jesus. And so our church has never been about the four walls. We don't even have our own walls, and so it wouldn't make any sense for us to be about the four walls. And so it would be misleading, I think, for us to talk about reopening the church, because the reality is our church has never closed. And so what I'm encouraging everybody to do in this season is to lean in to our role in being the church for the full 168, for being the church for this time when we're scattered. And I want you to know that our church continues to be open in some really, really significant ways. We have new people joining us every week from literally around the world. And when they join us online, they're hearing about the love of Jesus. Our church isn't closed. Our Camp Village Kids team, instead of canceling Camp Village Kids, they said, you know what, let's take this online and let's create an opportunity to reach more kids and more families than ever before. Our village groups are continuing to meet together in creative ways online, and they're caring for one another and they're praying together. Our kids team and our youth team are engaging our kids and youth online throughout the week. And together, you and I, through our giving, we're feeding over 120 kids and families every weekend, people who need extra food support. Our church has never closed. The second sort of principle that's guiding us is that we value creating a welcoming and a warm environment as a church. We've always thought that was important from the beginning. We want to create an environment where people of all ages can connect to Jesus and connect to a community of Jesus followers. And one of our calling cards as a church has been how welcoming and friendly we are. In fact, we once had somebody tell us as a compliment, this is an aggressively friendly church. And so we're realizing that it would be incredibly difficult for us to create that same kind of warm and welcoming environment while also following the social distancing measures that we would need to follow in order to follow the CDC guidelines and the guidelines of our local and national leaders. We would have to do things in order to be together in a large group. We would have to do things like take RSVPs for worship. We'd have to create kind of a no-touch environment with essentially no greeters and no handshakes. We would most likely have to wear masks during worship. We'd have to do things like temperature checks for our staff and our volunteers. And maybe most shockingly of all, coming from my mouth, is we wouldn't be able to have coffee and donuts. And so simply put, the way we do Sunday mornings at the village doesn't lend itself very well to some of the social distancing guidelines that we would need to follow in order to gather together. The third thing is that we love kids and families, right? Village Kids is a huge priority for us on Sunday mornings, and the reality is we wouldn't be able to open Village Kids on day one. A couple of reasons for that. One is kids don't do social distancing very well. But the second reason is we've heard from the vast majority of parents that they wouldn't feel comfortable bringing their kids to a Village Kids environment beginning on day one. And so this would mean that for the majority of our families to attend worship, they would need to bring their kids into the socially distant worship environment, following all of the guidelines that I mentioned just a minute ago. And the reality is, I think we would prefer we'd prefer to wait until we can create the most welcoming and open, hospitable environment possible that's more in line with our DNA as a church. The next thing is that we care about connecting disconnected people. That's our vision as a church. We started this church because we wanted to help people who feel far from God or disconnected from the church connect to Jesus and to a community of Jesus followers. So that means for us that we prioritize reaching the people who aren't here yet. That's who we've been from the beginning, and that's who we'll be on into the future. And let's be honest, a socially distant environment for worship, it doesn't help us put our best foot forward for our first-time guests. It doesn't help us put our best foot forward for people who already feel a little bit hesitant about church or people who feel disconnected from Christ. And we wouldn't want a first-time guest to go away having had a bad experience because we weren't able to greet them in the way that we normally would because of our social distance measures that we would have to take. The good news right now is that the barriers for attending our church have never been lower. The barriers for people to connect to Jesus through the village have never been lower than they are right now. Something else that's guiding us, and this is an overarching principle for us, is that we are flexible and we are adaptable. And we know that this continues to be a really fluid situation, and there are factors changing regularly. There are things changing really rapidly. Like every time you turn on the news, there's something new. And I just want you to know that as the lead team, we are willing and ready to be flexible and to be adaptable with the changing circumstances. And through all of it, we're inviting the Holy Spirit to do things that we couldn't plan or that we couldn't predict. And we know that there's so much of this that's outside of our control, but we're committed to be flexible and nimble and be so as much as we possibly can as we continue to navigate through this together. And then finally, here's the last principle, and this is kind of a duh moment, but we don't have our own facility. The reality is we don't have our own facility. And so we're working with the Williamson County school system to figure out when they're going to allow outside groups back into the building. But I do want you to know that last week we received communication from them, along with all of their outside groups who lease their buildings, that said until further notice, all leases in their school buildings have been suspended. They said they're going to come back together in mid-July to revisit that conversation and revisit that decision. But as of now, that's where things are. We're also continuing to explore all the available options in front of us for meeting. And at this point, the vast majority of the places we've been in contact with have given us a similar answer, that they're simply still not allowing outside groups to meet. And so I want you to know that we're going to continue to explore all the options and, of course, be in communication with you about that. So having stated all those principles, I want to share with you sort of our threefold plan for moving forward. We've been talking about three phases about how we continue to be the church together even as we're the church scattered. So phase one is that we're committing to continue to provide really high quality online worship experiences, Village Kids experiences, Village Youth experiences, and opportunities for people to gather together virtually for things like prayer and support and encouragement. And in fact, we're going to commit to that, to provide a high quality online worship experience, not only in phase one, but in the subsequent phases as well, knowing that there are people who will feel most comfortable with that for the foreseeable future. Phase two is that we're going to begin to encourage village groups and other small groups of people to gather together in yards and in homes as they feel comfortable and as the social distancing guidelines allow. And then finally, phase three, at some point, we will begin to meet together in person on Sunday mornings for worship. So I just want to say how grateful I am to the lead team of our church, to the medical professionals that are leading us and guiding us in this, and just for your shared leadership and their shared leadership during this time. And as you might imagine, it's really difficult to navigate through a time like this, and it's really difficult to make decisions on how best to lead a church forward in a time like this, and I'm really grateful that I don't have to do that alone. Listen, I know that we're not going to do this perfectly. I'm not going to make all the right decisions. I'm not going to make all the perfect decisions, but I trust and I pray that all of us together are going to continue to encourage one another and pray for one another as we figure out how to step forward together. Here's the deal. I'll say this as I close. I believe that the church in our community has never been more important than it is right now. It's never been more important for us to be the church in our community than it is right now. This world desperately needs the love of Jesus. And it's on us as individuals and as families to do everything we can to share that. Listen, I cannot wait until we're able to be the church gathered again. I can't wait until we're able to be the church gathered again. But I'm praying for you right now, and I'm praying for me, I'm praying for all of us that we'll continue to be faithful and we'll continue to take these steps forward together while we're in this season as the church scattered. So if there's anything at all specifically that I can be praying about for you, I hope you'll contact me. I'd be honored to pray for you in this time and in this season. And until then, I cannot wait to see you sometime soon.